So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Chris Mosner, SVP with Ipsos's Public Affairs team, focusing on thought leadership. Chris, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Ellen, and thank you all for joining our webinar today. As Ellen said, my name is Chris Mosner, and I lead the thought leadership team for Ipsos Public Affairs. This webinar is the third in a series of what I think are going to be about 8 during the fall and winter to focus on how industries, companies, and organizations can utilize thought leadership research programs to identify insights that can help communities better understand themselves and also give the sponsor of those insights an opportunity to take credit for sharing these insights with the world through external communications. Now, there'll be more information about the future webinars soon. We'll release a schedule and get that out to everyone. Now, our agenda today is quite streamlined. First, I will introduce myself and some of the members of our client team, as well as our special guest from Freddie Mac, Elizabeth Walton. Second, I do want to do a little bit of level setting about what thought leadership research is and why it's important to the public conversation. I also would like to touch on a couple of the processes and tools that we use to help our clients identify key insights for sharing. And as I said a moment ago, we're going to have a real conversation with Elizabeth Walton, who is the Director of Insights at Freddie Mac, and how her team arms senior leaders across Freddie Mac with insights about the American public. Now, we are having some technical difficulties in DC here today. We've got some thunderstorms, et cetera. So not all of our cameras are working, and the system is actually working with the cameras off. So I'm going to go the rest of the webinar until we get to questions with the camera off. As I mentioned before, my name is Chris Mosner, and I've worked in the Washington, D.C. market for 30 plus years, helping a range of government, industry, and corporate clients gauge attitudes and opinions of consumers, business leaders, congressional leaders on a multitude of topics. Also joining me today on the call is Alyssa Marciniak, who's a crack questionnaire writer and analyst working with many clients. But she's worked with me on a number of Freddie Mac projects over the years, and she may join us to ask a question when we're talking with Elizabeth. Also not on the call because of a family issue is Jenny Berg, and just a shout out to her, she's a master craftsman of surveys for thought leadership and public release, and she would have also been part of this conversation. I'm hoping to have her back for the next webinar. Now, let me introduce Elizabeth. She serves as Market Insights Director in Corporate Communications and Marketing at Freddie Mac. She's served in a number of research firms over her career, helping some very well-known clients manage their reputation and brand, develop new products, and create customer communications and crisis management strategies. Now, she's been at Freddie since 2006, and I must say I've known Elizabeth for many years, and I find her to be one of the smartest and most gifted insights and communications researcher in the DC area. She's really able to provide her internal clients with the data they need to make strategic decisions through very precise and directional storytelling. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chris.
Let me just, at the very top here, I want to take a few minutes to talk about what thought leadership is and what it isn't. First, thought leadership is not marketing in disguise or an advertising campaign. The goal of thought leadership research is to identify the most compelling themes and narratives around a topic or issue. But it does allow the sponsoring company an opportunity to advance their authority and insight on the topic, which can elevate their voice in the conversation with business and media leaders, as well as stakeholders. The end goal is to make these insights public so that the public can have a learned and informed conversation about the issue. We're looking to uncover attitudes, emotions, behaviors, and choices consumers are making about a particular topic, especially in changing times when choice options can be quite fluid. Think COVID. We are trying to uncover what's next and what information or tools consumers, employees, employers, governments, what they need next to reach that next place. What is the information they need so they can make good decisions moving forward? Now, those new and fresh learnings are turned into thought-provoking and mission-critical storytelling to engage consumers where they are. And as I said before, this also gives sponsors of these studies a distinct and authoritative moment to advance the conversation. Now, our team at Ipsos has honed our thought leadership process to ensure that our clients maximize the value in bringing something new to society and again, driving that conversation. The process starts with Ipsos asking a lot of questions: the who, the what, the where, the when, the why of the moment. What headlines are you hoping to share from the research? Where are you hoping to see the results? And how are you going to use the results both internally and externally? We then work with clients to develop the topic and make sure it fits with their mission. We do research on research, if you will, to determine if the topic is already saturated or if there's room for new information. We think through the methodology to make sure we're using the proper sample and survey technique. Is it quant or qual? Is it probability or non-probability samples? We then move to writing an excellent questionnaire that engages the respondent on the topic. We want to go deep to ensure that what we understand from the audience is truly compelling. We want to understand what they think and how they act and why it is that they do what they do. Once the survey is done in the field, we go to work on the analysis, ferreting out the most important insights, and working with a client to develop deliverables that can be shared with the public through news clips, press releases, op-eds, white papers, and also becoming more popular, producing videos that humanize people making decisions in the moment. On the last slide, I mentioned methods and samples. Now, in the survey business, there are a lot of different and appropriate samples, both non-probability and probability samples that help understand what's going on a particular topic. However, when you have a mission-critical project that is going to get a great deal of press and scrutiny, when you need to be precise about subgroups and differences across groups, using a probability-based sample is very important. And Ipsos has the knowledge panel, the original, largest, and well-established online probability-based research panel in the US. And in fact, our client, Freddie Mac, uses this panel sample for their most important studies that they believe will have both an external release as well as having a great deal of precision in terms of making decisions on products and messages internally. Now, I don't want to hog the show, Elizabeth, so I'm gonna pull you in here. So again, welcome, Elizabeth. Can you give us a description about who Freddie Mac really is and what it provides for its stakeholders? And then also kind of what is Freddie's role in the housing market?
Sure. And thank you, Chris, so much for inviting me to do this today. So I'm sure a lot of people either don't know who Freddie Mac is or probably have some misconceptions about who we are. For us, I think really that slogan that you see right there kind of says it all. Freddie Mac, we make home possible. For us, I think this is the core of everything that we do, and it really drives the passion in us all who work at Freddie. Our role is really to enable millions of Americans to have homes. Pretty simple, whether as a homeowner or a renter. One of the biggest misconceptions I think out there is, Freddie Mac is a mortgage lender or bank who provides mortgages. And, that's not really our role. at the end of the day, our primary purpose is kind of threefold. We are here to support the market in providing liquidity, to help create affordability, and to be a stable force in the marketplace. And as we kind of think about all three of those, liquidity. So, lenders and banks are actually our customers, and they're the ones who make the loans, whether that's a mortgage to homeowner, it's a loan for an apartment building. And those lenders then in turn work with us at Freddie, and we buy those loans from them. And in buying those loans, that actually frees up more money for those companies to then make more loans. Affordability, that's pretty simple. We work to try to make it easier for all Americans to have housing that they can afford. We're always looking for new ways, new programs, new initiatives to help create rental properties people can afford, home ownership opportunities for those who would like to buy. We even have educational programs for Americans on how to better manage their finances, improve their credit, and to become, more responsible in terms of paying their bills, which can help them lead to owning a home in the future. And I think the last thing that, we do as a company is, we are there to provide market stability. We were created not only just to be there when things are running fantastic and great, but really to be there when things aren't running all that well. And to some extent to actually lean in a little bit more. If you think back to the financial crisis in 2008, or even more recently with COVID, we have to provide additional support during those times to make sure that homeowners can stay in their homes and that renters are able to stay in their property as well.
Great. Now let's turn this into a real conversation here. We'll go through a couple slides as we have this conversation, but you mentioned a number of stakeholder audiences there, and there's a lot of target audiences there for which information is really important for Freddie, both kind of understanding how people think and feel and do. But when you think about idea generation, where does this come for you?
I don't think it comes from one place. I think we get ideas from all over the place, and we work with a lot of different groups throughout the company. It could be just a simple thing I read in the newspaper, or it could be a simple statement made from one of our internal clients while we're giving another presentation that sparks an idea and a discussion about additional area that we can explore. I know some of our ideas have come from, our many industry partners and nonprofit organizations that we work with, and honestly had a couple ideas come from you guys for at Ipsos. So I really think you have to be ready for it. Inspiration pops up anywhere and everywhere, and be open to new ideas and different ways of thinking. For us, and it might be for a lot of our listeners here today, housing is one of those topics that is surveyed by so many companies and reported on by so many different groups. And it's a lot of the same topics. So like from a thought leadership standpoint, while it's important to maintain, this standard trends and tracking, you also have to shake things up, keep it a little bit interesting. Think about them in a fresh and different way. Think about how current events such as COVID, or maybe changing aspects of society are affecting housing differently. And for me, it's always amazing of how many things in society actually have an influence on people's housing and financial decisions.
Well, you have a lot of teams at Freddie, kind of each with their own strategic needs. How does your research team play a part in bringing these teams together with all of this data that you're pulling in these surveys?
Well, I'm looking at this picture. It's probably a really simplified version of our inside teams and partners for research. We have two lines of business, but there's multiple people that we interact with within those lines of business. Outside of also our PR team and our external communications team, and they all have a stake in our research. And that's not even getting up to the senior executives. And I think for us, I feel like we like to engage them all when we're thinking about an idea for research, even if it doesn't seem directly impactful to their business. I feel like we can't operate in just a silo. Everything that we do, particularly in the thought leadership realm, impacts all of our internal business partners in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes pre-COVID, we would, do this organically, lunches, coffee, and then sometimes we are pretty overt about it. We will actually share the design of the survey questions with them because our clients in single family and multifamily or corporate communications, they all have, to your point, Chris, their own strategic objectives and priorities, and we want to make sure we address those if we can, because particularly with thought leadership, the broader you can get the study to be and have engagement across all your lines of business, the more impactful it is, not only internally, but also externally.
Interesting. And you mentioned leadership. So I'm aware that there's been changes at the very top of Freddie Mac in the last year or so. And I know that there's been various levels of appetite for or need for information at the very top. What is the new CEO like in terms of needing and using and thinking about research and thought leadership data?
Well, I guess since I'm dating myself, having been at Freddie for I think about 15 years, I think I've definitely been through a lot of leadership changes. I can't speak for our new CEO; he's still relatively new, and I'm getting his footing. But having been through various CEOs, other senior executives coming and going, I think the phrase that we tend to use a lot at Freddie, and I'm sure a lot of other people do, is the only thing constant around here is change. And, you have to be adaptable to that. For us, I think the appetite for insights is always there, regardless of who's in charge and who the leadership is. It just might be, I think their focus is a little bit different and their priorities and where they kind of want to lean into, and you have to be flexible to that and adjust your strategy accordingly. But at the end of the day, for any company, I think your mission is your mission. Your vision is your vision. Who the company is doesn't change regardless of leadership changes, whether it's the CEO or other senior leaders. And it's really important to kind of keep that focus in mind. And, as new leadership comes in, it's up to you as an insights person to make that connection for leadership between, our company's purpose and our mission and then their priorities. And then the insights that you're trying to do to help move the company along. And I think the more you can make that connection of how it's for the betterment of the company and how it's kind of, pushing the company forward, being a thought leader, I think it will ultimately make you more successful.
Wow, that's some great insight right there. Kind of last question in this area is what determines if a new insight stays only internal or if it merits some sort of external communications?
We have a bunch of different questions on this slide. I think we start any idea, any study with trying to answer these core questions around, who are our stakeholders? Who are the internal clients for this research? And then who might this research influence externally? Because we do work with, lenders and banks, and then, we work with nonprofit organizations. So we have a multitude of different stakeholders that we have to think through. And then coming internally, when you think about, is the information connected to different products or initiatives? And do we have to keep that to ourselves? Does it influence multiple corporate priorities? I think one of the great things, and you shared it a little bit in one of your earlier slides, Chris, that we learned from working with you at Ipsos is, when we're thinking about this might be something that we want to release externally, is thinking about our headlines. So thank you, Chris. Is, what's the best possible headline we could get from this research? And then what's the worst possible headline? What's the worst thing that can come out of this? And then are we comfortable with that? And when you're thinking about, is a study going to be released externally, you have to be comfortable with sharing the good news and the bad, and have an answer for it. And sometimes you don't. The sooner you can make that determination up front, the better. But I also think, as we think about what's going to be released internally and externally, as researchers, at least for us at Freddie, and I'm sure a lot of different companies, when you're doing thought leadership research and you publish it, you're not actually always the voice or the face out there. It's your executives, our economists, our sales teams, our PR staff, when media calls. I mean, they're the ones who are actually on the front lines when we share research externally. So you actually have to put yourself in their shoes, think about the questions that they might get asked, and make sure, again, they're comfortable with defending the good, the bad, and the ugly that comes out of that thought leadership research. And then I think, we will continuously, we might set something to be released externally at the beginning of the study, and we keep going back to our core questions, asking them over and over again, from design to analysis. And sometimes, something happens, COVID, and you end up not being able to share it externally. And, that's how it is, but that doesn't mean that just because you weren't able to share it externally, it doesn't also merit some good internal thought leadership.
Absolutely. Thank you for those insights. I particularly like the fact that you recognize there's so many different people who are carrying those insights externally, and arming them with things that they can use so they look smart. They're bringing new ideas to the conversation. And that you're not making them look bad. That's all part of the process. You sent me over this slide. I'm showing a slide of the thought leadership research process. And I laugh because I know who helped build this slide at one point. This is really strategic. This is a really strategic way to think about thought leadership process. You want to take us through how you think about things?
Yeah, it's kind of funny for me because, when you first invited me to do this, I was trying to think long and hard, what's a good analogy for how we kind of go through and think about thought leadership and the process here at Freddie Mac. And, I have a school-age child, and when COVID first hit, we were playing a lot more board games. So, I was originally thinking of the game Chutes and Ladders, or Snakes and Ladders, I think some people know it by. And, as you think about the concept of the game, it's, there's a start and there's an end. And, sometimes a ladder pops up, like the CEO is really engaged or senior executive endorses the research. And then sometimes you hit a slide or a snake, and then suddenly you're all the way down at the bottom. But as I thought about it a little bit more, as most games are, to my point earlier, it has a clear start and an end. And I don't think thought leadership research actually falls in that category, because I feel like it doesn't really have a clear ending to it, and it shouldn't. So as I was going through my stacks of board games, I actually thought it felt a lot more like Monopoly. And it's, according to my mother, it's the game that never ends. And you can come up with an idea. You're going to shop it around internally. You're trying to get your approvals along the way. You're going to run into a challenge. And it might take you a few steps back. Maybe there's a new process that pops up that you didn't know about. New people join the company, and you kind of have to adjust your strategy. Or, somebody bought the property that you wanted. And, even when you've done the analysis and gotten to the other side and you've shared it internally and or externally, the game's not over. The thing I love about research is every research study raises new questions, new possible areas for exploration, new places to build upon, and go a little bit deeper. And then you're going back around the board again through the whole process. And I think that's, the fun, challenging but fun aspect of thought leadership research is that it just can continue, and you can continue building upon all the different things that you've done and studied and released, and just add a different element to the story.
Excellent. Let me ask you We've done a lot of studies with you, and I asked you before the presentation to just think around some of the studies that we have done together and kind of share some key points or some new learnings that you weren't expecting going in, or something about each of these three studies that really moved you in terms of bringing something new to the table.
Sure. So I will say I would never recommend to anybody to show this much on one slide. It is really an art target, particularly for me. But here I thought it was a little less about the numbers and really about the three different components. They all had, they're all released externally, and they all clearly focused on different audiences, but they all had a different strategy to them when we got to the release. And, if we look at baby boomers, that one, I think, 2016, we did that study, so it's been nearly 5 years. It was a big splash. I mean, we created like this huge external communication strategy and plan that not only included, the typical press release, but talking points for executives, for sales, hit some major news publications. Moving into like Gen Z, with that one, it was a little bit softer. I think we did a press release, maybe some local radio spotlights, still kind of a splash, but not as big as the other one. And then more recently with urban renting, and we're actually almost going into the field with our third wave of this. I think even our strategy with this round has been a little bit more targeted and more strategic, rather than, rolling out in one big press release all the results. Working with our PR team, what we've decided to do is like kind of chunk it up in smaller blog posts to talk about different areas of the research. This latest one actually, has, before we even popped on, Chris, it just got published on the website around, how is teleworking versus non-teleworkers, how is that changing the aspect of urban living? So, I think they each have their own benefits, and have enabled us to think about housing in a very different way.
Interesting. I have a couple. I'm going to turn to some questions, and some people have already been entering things into this box. So I wanted to ask you, the first one I see here says, if you have to give one hint or tip to others when it comes to generating insights for thought leadership, what would that be? Just one hint.
I'm like, you gotta narrow it to one. No, I think the word I kept using earlier, I thought flexible, but really just being open. Again, for me, I think the surprising aspect of all of this is how many things do influence housing, and being open to an idea that can come from anywhere, and that you wouldn't think has a connection to what you do actually does, somewhere along the way, and just listening to all of your stakeholders at the end of the day.
All right. Second question, and I'm going to send it to you because I can talk about sample all day long. But the second one was, does sample matter? How do you think the different sample methods? How do you think about them, and when do you apply them? I think this has probability versus non-probability.
Yeah, and you were talking about that earlier. I mean, I won't lie, I'm slightly biased because while I've been at Freddie Mac for 15 years, I started out my career on the vendor side. And, I think ideally we would all love to use probability sample for everything that we do. As academics, as purists in what we do, I think, you said it pretty good earlier, Chris. Probability sample for us and how we think about it at Freddie is, those big studies, the three that you were showing earlier. It's important to us because, the press is going to look at it. We have a lot of engagement with a lot of think tanks and economists And so, probability sampling has to stand up to their level of scrutiny. When we try to, think about non-probability sample, again, preference is always to use probability, but I think non-probability sampling can come into play when you're thinking about the 80-20 rule, when you're trying to do a pilot program or a quick test to something work, and you're just looking for, honestly, something fast, simple, and inexpensive. That, again, it won't be published externally, but it's good enough to get the ball rolling on a project.
Excellent. I'm just noting that we are really up on time, and I want to be responsible with people's time. So Elizabeth, I really want to thank you for participating today and kind of connecting the dots the way that you do. For those of you who are on the webinar, if you have additional questions, feel free to type that into the question portal, and I will be back to you with a response. Or if it's a question for Elizabeth, I'll pass it on to her. So thank you guys for participating in today's webinar. I mentioned that there will be more during the fall and winter, where we will have a series of clients on to talk about not only how they think about thought leadership, but how they're using that data to have a conversation with their stakeholders. And with that, Ellen, I'll pass it back to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And yes, thank you to Elizabeth for today's really interesting discussion, and to Chris. For those, as a reminder, be on the lookout for an email with a direct link to today's recorded presentation that will come within the next couple of days. And at any time, please reach out to us. We welcome the opportunity to speak with you. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.